Hi, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit more about Junee Licorice and Chocolate Factory's location. And I really wanted to try and hit home with you the idea about the spatial dimension. The spatial dimension in geography is a core concept which talks about where something is, but also why it's there. And it's a hallmark of a good geographer and good geography writing, if we're thinking about our HSC, is if we are talking about a location, we should always locate it, and we can do that in a number of ways. That could be talking about the latitude and longitude, which is an example of an absolute location, where we can use coordinate system. We could talk about a relative location, the distance and direction our location is from another well-known place. And we can also talk about the site details. So the way I like to think about those three levels of location information is if you were talking, a friend of yours called you up on the phone and said, "Hey, I'm trying to get to Junee Licorice Chocolate Factory," and they text you the coordinates, and you're nearby, but you're not too sure where you are. You say, "I'm at the train station," and they'll go, "No worries, you're in the middle of town. You just need to travel like 2 k's northeast or northwest." So that's the relative location. And then you text your friend again and you say, "Look, I think I'm there. How would I know?" And they go, "Well, you should see a large building in front of you. It's pretty flat. If you look west, you're going to see some train lines, that sort of thing." So that's describing the site details. So that's what a really good geographer will do was give as much locational information as possible. And there's sort of those three tiers to it, going from very specific in terms of coordinate system to looking at other known locations and their relationship, and also what you would see if you were on the ground at that particular location. So that takes care of the first part of the spatial dimension, where things are. We also want to do the second part is why it's there. And that's what this video is probably more about, because we did a locational video the other day. So for the Junee factory, we're going to start with this large scale map. Because we can tell it's a large scale map because all the details appear fairly large. And what I mean by that is I can see individual roads or streets. I can see where Monte Cristo is. I can see, even creeks and little rivulets sort of mapped out on here. So details appear large. That's because it's covering a small area. So large scale covers a small area. And as we zoom out from this large scale map to a smaller scale map, we're going to have a look at some of the details as well. So later on in the course, you're going to look at how Junee is connected to other businesses, and that's probably at the heart of its spatial dimension as well. So before I go and have a look at exactly where it is in terms of inside Junee, the two main things that we need to understand about it is that it is a food production facility. So it is a factory, and it does make it's a secondary industry factory producing chocolate and other products, but it also is part of the tourism sector as well. So you can see here already on the screen that we've got hotels, cafes, bakeries, a motor inn, Monte Cristo, the haunted house. You've got other accommodation, and there's a couple more around here. They are all connected to the Junee factory, so it's got connections on its local scale. I might just flick over to the satellite image quickly. And I just wanted to show you a bit of the context. Because we are talking about the township of Junee, it is somewhat of an urban area, but it is only a small town as well. What we should see in the background, it looks better in colour, is that this is actually an agricultural region. So to give you a bit of the history, which helps explain the location of the Junee Licorice and Chocolate Factory, it's connected to the farming region around it. And I'll talk to you about that and zoom out to that smaller scale so you can see. So you can definitely see it's in the middle of this agricultural region. And that agricultural region is well known for a lot of the grains that we would consume, particularly wheat. And if we zoom out even further, we might be able to see a small township called Ardlethan. Ardlethan's a little bit closer to places like Griffith. Where's Ardlethan? You can see it up here. So at Ardlethan, there is another arm of the Greengroves company. There is an organic wheat farm out there, which Neil Druce's father, Alan Druce, runs. and they're one of the main suppliers for the organic wheat that goes to the Junee Licorice and Chocolate Factory. And it's a relatively short distance for a supplier. So initially, when Neil Druce saw the flour mill in Junee, he knew that it had been defunct for a while. It hadn't been used since probably the 1970s. And in 1998, they decided to refurb it and open it up again and make it into a working flour mill again. But they wanted to operate in a niche market. So they decided to go with organic flour. Now, organics obviously has a lot of benefits to people as well as the environment. So you'll be able to talk about that later on in the ecological dimension part of the syllabus. So we've got a close supplier, and they've started the business initially as a flour making mill, and it's in the middle of a wheat growing region. So there's a strong tie already to its location. There's you want to be close to your suppliers because that saves on time and money in terms of transport. There's going to be less spoilage of the inputs that go into your business, and you are offering employment to the local industries around you. So there's actually a nice interconnection between the farms around that organic farm supplying wheat to the Junee factory. So the story goes, after they started producing organic flour, they wanted to diversify a bit, increase their market share and profitability. So they thought, what's a bit more exciting than flour? Licorice. So they moved into licorice making. Now, licorice making, if you didn't know, that a main ingredient of licorice is actually flour. So it was actually quite a logical step to go from organic flour to making organic licorice. They just had to find some of the machinery and get upskilled in the process of that. So at the moment, the Junee Licorice and Chocolate Factory is actually the largest organic licorice factory in the Southern Hemisphere. And, you can double check that if you want, but that's what Neil told me. So it's utilizing its surroundings to become more profitable and more successful. And again, we're sort of telling the story of its location and reasoning that, but we're also hinting at some of the interconnections. So when you look again later in the syllabus, you'll be able to come back to this information as a bit of evidence about how it's connected to its local community. So it started to find suppliers as well. And as best they can, they're trying to use localized suppliers. But one of the other main ingredients of licorice that gives it that real flavor is licorice root. And the best supplier that they found for that was actually an Egyptian company. So the organic licorice is sourced from Egypt. So going from flour to licorice actually meant that they were increasing their connectivity around the world. It's becoming a globalized business through its supply chain. After they started to grow because of their licorice and become well known, they again decided, how do we still grow our business and diversify further? And the next logical step was to move into chocolate because, and there's a quote of this in your book, 50% of people like licorice, but 70% of people love chocolate. So that's part of the research they did. And so they decided to move into first of all, probably coating their licorice in chocolate, organic chocolate, and then moving into other chocolate-based products as well. So the chocolate that they receive comes from Belgium, which, if we track that back, would come straight from, the cocoa beans come from farms on West Africa as well. So again, as it grows, it becomes this diversified and global business through its supply chains. So back to why is it located here? So, through that story, we've just sort of connected. It's close to its suppliers. It's close to the agricultural product, which makes up its organic flour product and its organic licorice as well. The other reason that it's sort of located where it is because the structure was there. The Junee flour mill had been sitting there defunct. So and I'm just trying to zoom back in on that, sorry. The Druce family bought the flour mill fairly cheaply off the council, and they had a plan in mind to not only benefit themselves and their productivity, but also benefit the town. So that would have been part of their pitch to make this a profitable business, but also and by cheaply from the Junee Council, but also to ensure that they were able to share that around the town as well. So a part of the reason it is located where it is because the facilities were already there. So they're doing a little bit of what we might term adaptive reuse. The building was there. And I'll just see if we can have a look at the building if we pin ourselves on Lord Street. Okay, so we can see the large building that's here. This brick side of the building was the part of the flour mill that was designed not to get burnt down. Now, I don't know if I've already said this on a different video, but you can see that half of the building is metal, and that would have been the half of the building where the original flour mill stored its flour. And because of the highly flammable nature of flour, it was designed so that if, should it go up in flames, that half of the building, would obviously get destroyed, but the other brick half would be saved. And there are actually, in between the two sides, this heavy doors that would also prevent flames getting through, that would automatically shut if there was a fire. So this building is sitting there in a decayed state, and they decided to come in, renew it in adaptive reuse so that it's now, yes, still sort of being used as a flour mill, but actually its fundamental function is now changed to a tourism and chocolate and licorice manufacturing site. So the second major reason it's located where it is because the facilities were already there. It's close to its suppliers, plus the facility was already there. The building was already there, ripe to be renewed and utilised for a new purpose. So there are some other reasons listed in your workbook, but they're the main ones that I'd probably like to focus on at the moment. Now, just to expand on some of that idea while I'm here, the Junee factory was so successful in Junee that one of the nearby councils approached the Druce family and said, "Hey, we've got a flour mill in our town, and this is a town called Corowa." I might just zoom out so you can see a bit of context where Corowa is. It's on the Murray River. It's just west of or southwest of Albury. So if I can just zoom out to show you Albury, I've still got my. All right, so Albury's here. Oh yeah, it's just west of Albury. And if we zoom back in again, we'll be able to see that the Corowa Council, and I'll just get us on Steel Street. The Corowa Council had sitting there this old abandoned sort of flour mill. Am I looking at the right building there? I am. It's been a while since I was at Corowa. We'll just go down a bit further. Okay, so we've got this large abandoned building, again another flour mill, and on this site it was just sitting in decayed, and they knew in the Corowa Council that Junee had a lot of success. So they approached the Druce family, who they probably knew were looking to expand again, and they decided to offer them this building for $1 at a ridiculously low price. But then again, the purpose was to make a local business, utilize local ingredients, so wheat, and make whiskey in this case. They also make chocolate and other things here as well. And obviously there needs to be an update of the photo here. It looks a lot more cleaned up after the Druce family got involved. But you can now go visit there and see the success they bring into Corowa, much like they did the same to Junee. Interestingly, when I talked to Neil Druce about this, he mentioned that after they'd purchased the factory from the council for $1, on inspection when they were walking through, they found $1 on the floor, so they effectively got it for free. But they did have a lot of costs in refurbishing the place and getting it up and running. So you can, when you go inside, if you have a visit there, you'll see there's a large distillery, but there's also a space for weddings. There's a space for chocolate freckle making. There's a gift shop, all those sorts of things. So it's become very much a destination. So I wanted just to say that both Junee and Corowa are on sort of this regional gastronomic tourism path. So a lot of people who do go to regional areas, and I'm going to get off Street View if I can. A lot of people who go to regional areas are drawn by something. They might be drawn by a museum, a little bit of history. So if you go down to the Murray, you might go to Echuca and look at the paddle steamers. If you go to, I don't know, where else would you go? If you go to a place like Griffith, you might go there for its wine. But if you're going to Junee and Corowa, you're probably going there on this gastronomic path. So between Sydney and Melbourne, there's actually this trail of chocolate factories or chocolate shops. And Junee is definitely one of those stations along there. So people like to go to regional areas because there's something a bit more authentic about the produce that they have there. So they might have, unique flavors. If you were studying viticulture, they talk about the terroir. And I don't know how to pronounce that, but essentially that local areas have local flavors. So for us, and we're focusing on Junee, there's something about Junee. It's got a presence. It's got connection to the local suppliers, and again, it also has a connection to the other local tourism business. Climate also plays an important role in determining the location of the Junee factory. So building on the previous ideas, the climate obviously is appropriate for the agricultural region that it sits within. So it's a nice stable climate for grain growing, wheat growing. So that's why the Green Groves Organic Wheat Farm is in the region as well, the Riverina region as well. But the climate also helps the Junee Licorice factory itself. So in your workbook, you'll see there's some climate data for you to draw your own climate graph. But it also makes reference to the fact that because it is an inland area and it is relatively flat in topography, that it's somewhat predictable the types of weather events and climatic conditions that you're going to get year after year. And these do, alter because of, climate variations like El Nino. But relatively speaking, it's fairly predictable, in particular because of its temperature. So the temperature is part of the temperate climate. So it doesn't get too hot, it doesn't get too cold. Although being in an inland area, it obviously does have those daily temperatures where it can become increasingly cold, being inland from the ocean, as well as being a little bit higher in altitude. It's roughly about 320 meters in altitude, and that just means that it can experience some cold temperatures, particularly on a winter morning. But the main impact that I guess climate has on the Junee Licorice and Chocolate Factory is that because of its stability and the temperatures do not become extremes, is that there's limited spoilage of their products. So what I mean by that is the licorice that they produce requires a relatively dry humidity, and again, being inland from the ocean in a flat region means that there's usually not too high humidity. If there is heat, it's going to be a dry heat, and that means that the licorice won't sweat and become all moist in its packaging and develop any bacteria or fungus. And the other important thing is that with chocolate, it also needs this sort of temperate to cool temperatures as well. And that's because that if chocolate becomes heat affected, it does what we call blooming, and that's where the fat content will rise to the surface of the chocolate. And a lot of people argue that that's safe to eat, which it is, but it also lowers, in particularly the consumer's mind, the quality of the chocolate, because it will develop a slightly different taste and a different texture to it, and it just doesn't look appealing as normal chocolate. So the temperatures there mean that it's unlikely that the Junee chocolate will become spoiled in that way, won't be heat affected. So that means that the location of the Junee factory in terms of climate means that it's relatively stable and predictable, and it suits the types of products that they're creating at the factory.